Dallas Theological Seminary's Chapel Podcast.
I'm pleased to introduce our president, Dr. Mark Bailey, as our speaker in chapel today. Dr. Bailey came to Dallas Seminary in 1985 as a professor in Bible exposition, and in 1997 he was appointed vice president for academic affairs and academic dean, and then in 2001 he was named the fifth president of Dallas Seminary. Please join with me and welcome Dr. Mark Bailey as our speaker.
If you were looking at the schedule, Dr. Charles Swindoll was scheduled to be with us this morning. He had a medical procedure this week. He called me while I was in Birmingham as a part of the ATS evaluation team at Beeson Divinity School this week, and said, "Mark, I just can't do that and be in chapel at the same time." And I said, "We understand that." And so he and I have exchanged, and he'll pick one up for me at another time. And I'm happy to be here and welcome those of you who are new on our campus today. For our students who are in the middle of the semester and plugging away, Fall Fest is a great relief, and we would invite you to that this afternoon as well. And it is a gorgeous day created for that. So this is terrific. I have a wonderful family with whom I have the privilege of spending what we call nights at the round table. And not spelled with a K, but with an N, because we love playing games as a family. My wife and our two sons, their wives, and now our grandchildren. And so we're often around our round breakfast table at our house playing games and board games and Scrabble and Boggle and Cutthroat Uno and Speed Scrabble, all of those kinds of things. And it gets loud, it gets rowdy, and we usually have tears coming down our cheeks with laughter and fun. We just have a great time. And one of the new games that we have been playing recently is called Wise or Otherwise. Maybe you've not heard of it. It is a game that you play on a board, and you start at one end and with one of these markers try to get to the other end by fooling your partners, or you're fooling your game components, and also scoring points by guessing right answers in a game in which there is a whole set of cards, and they're famous sayings. And you answer those cards, and you move around, move forward on the board so many spaces. For example, my wife pulled these out for me. She said, "There's an old Creole saying, and the way the game is played, if you see your neighbor's beard on fire, ... and you get to write down some crazy answers that you hope others will think is your answer, like put your head in a bucket of water, throw dirt on his face, call 911, and then when you score it, there is a correct answer on the other side of the card, and the correct answer to that old Creole saying, if you see your neighbor's beard on fire, water your own." It's a wise saying. Jesus would say, if you're trying to get a speck of dust out of somebody else's eye, remove the log out of your own. There's an old Portuguese saying, never put money into a sack. Possible answers, unless you're at the bank. Put it in your shoe. But the real answer is never put money in a sack without seeing if it has a hole in it first. That's a wise saying. There's an old Chinese saying, a bird in the soup is better than. And the real correct answer is an eagle's nest in the desert. That's a cultural saying. You'd have to have it explained. I would have to have it explained. If you wanted to trick your opponent, you might say, a bird in the soup is better than a cricket in your soup, or an oxtail in your soup, or something like that. There's an old Scottish saying, your bread's baked, you may now. And the correct answer is, hang up your girdle. You might have said, butter it, go out and play, eat the rest of your meal, whatever it is. But there really is an old Persian proverb that says this. It's a proverb about wisdom that sounds more like a tongue twister than it does sound advice. But listen carefully and you'll hear the ring of truth. There's an old Persian proverb. It says, "He who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool. Shun him. He who knows not and knows he knows not is a child. Teach him. He who knows and knows not that he knows, he's asleep. Wake him. He who knows and knows that he knows is wise. Follow him." That might be a Persian proverb, but the question is, would God have written that one? I want you to see a proverb that God did write through his author, his human author. How blessed is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding. For its profit is better than the profit of silver, and its grain than fine gold. It goes on in the passage to say she's more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her. He goes on in that passage, long life is in her right hand, and in her left are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all of her paths are peace. And she is a tree of life to all of those who take hold of her, and happy are all who hold her fast. T.S. Eliot decries the problem of human wisdom in a section in his writings called Choruses from the Rock. Listen to them. The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention and endless experiment, brings knowledge of motion but not of stillness, knowledge of speech but not of silence, knowledge of words and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to our ignorance, and all our ignorance brings us nearer to death, but nearness to death no nearer to God. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we've lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries bring us farther from God and nearer to the dust. That's a man who understands the difference between human wisdom and divine wisdom. The writer of the Proverbs says in 4:7, the beginning of wisdom is this: acquire wisdom, and in all your acquiring, get understanding. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to James chapter 3. James chapter 3. I have been working with this passage over the last few weeks, and especially intensified that in the last few days as I got the phone call that I would be up and today. James chapter 3, beginning in verse 13 is where we will start. Because this passage in James in chapter 3 agrees with the Proverbs and focuses us on the need for wisdom. Our culture is fat on information but thin on wisdom. One of the challenges in becoming godly leaders, writes one, is to learn how to take the raw material of knowledge and refine it into wisdom. In the Bible Knowledge Commentary written by present and former members of our faculty, Ron Blue writes the section on James, and I love his outline of the first 3 chapters. He titles them this way: a believer should, in chapter 1, stand confidently, in chapter 2, serve compassionately, and in chapter 3, with the tongue as the emphasis through most of this chapter, speak carefully. In those early chapters, James has begun to give us a series of tests to see whether our faith is genuine faith. He's given us the Bible test, whether or not we receive the engrafted word which is able to save our souls. He gives us the question of discernment and preference. Are we playing partiality or are we not? And it's a preferential treatment test. In chapter 2, he also gives us the works test. And in chapter 3, the tongue test. In James 3:13 through 18, he now gives us another test, and that is the wisdom test. James begins this chapter with the warning that not everyone should aspire to be a teacher. A teacher is judged with more scrutiny because of the effects of their words, the use of their tongues, the kind of wisdom that they possess. And for us who minister by teaching and preaching the Word of God, the resultant message that we proclaim. And so this is a very apropos message for us at Dallas Seminary, for you who are visiting for Dallas Seminary, because in our design and in our desire, it would not be that you would just get information for knowledge alone puffs up, but that your knowledge would be refined while you're here and when you leave here into wisdom. The application for those of us who study and for those of us who teach is obvious. The question is, from where will we get the message that we live ourselves and that we deliver to our people? This morning, I want to have us look again at a very familiar passage, but maybe from a couple of different angles, and see two kinds of wisdom that are outlined. It's like there's two panels of attributes and descriptions. There's the kind of wisdom that fails the test, and there's the kind of wisdom that passes the test of faith. We might again raise the title, Wise or Otherwise. James describes two kinds of wisdom. He characterizes them as wisdom that comes from above and a wisdom that is not from above. It's human wisdom distinguished from the kind of wisdom that only can come from God. Each kind of wisdom has its roots, and it also has its fruits. And in between the roots and the fruits, you might say that there are some attributes, the characteristics. Did you know that a tree can extend its roots out until they cover up an area of 3 times the height of a tree? You might never realize this until one of those pokes its way into your sewer line, or one begins to grow into your house's foundation. We've all seen people pour concrete right next to trees without ever thinking about it. The next thing you know, the tree roots have cracked and have heaved to a point that causes that almost to be destroyed. Why do people do that? We're living next door to a neighbor who just put in a big pool, gorgeous pool. Unfortunately, and my wife has a pretty green thumb and is very careful with these things, they covered up the root flares as they rearranged the dirt. They built the pool with all the cement decking, and by covering the tree flares, they have lost a very aged, gorgeous, caricatured and charactered tree that was a part of our landscape as we looked out one direction of our backyard. My wife is not a happy camper. She says, "Don't they know?" And I said, "The tree has already died." "Why didn't they know?" "I don't know." But the roots are hidden, and they thought covering them, they're hidden from view. There is no problem. But they quietly exist beneath the surface. But every part of the tree exists because of what is carried to it by those hidden roots. And if the roots are destroyed, if the roots are damaged, if the roots are diseased, so will be the tree. The leaves will be diseased, the fruit will be destroyed. I remember a few years ago when our beloved colleague who's on sabbatical this year, Dr. Eugene Merrill, spoke in James chapter 3. He talked about what wisdom is not. It is not intellectual accumulation. It's not philosophical sophistication. It's not postgraduate education. It's not confident self-promotion. If that's not what it is, then what does this text say it really is? I want you to see and look at the text, and for those of you who've been here for a semester or two, I expect you to be able to read this. For those of you who are new, this is where you get to come. I want you to see there's an inclusio. I want you to see the style and the structure. Many people think James is just sort of pearl-strung aphorisms and one thought after another thought, but the beauty of this passage is tremendous in its original language. There's an inclusio form by the setting out the theme of Sophia. You who have not had Greek know what that is. The idea of wisdom. It's at the beginning in verse 13, and it's the ending of a section before a final proverb in verse 17. And then there's a reference in the middle of the passage to it in verse 15. What wisdom is not and where it does not come from and where it does come from. But there's another stylistic device in this passage, and that is in the second section of our passage when he's describing true wisdom. He starts and ends with the concept of peace, because the whole process begins, progresses, and ends with the theme of peace. Human wisdom will be exactly the opposite of divine wisdom when its final result is seen. There is another stylistic device, and that is, in the first section, it describes the wisdom of the world with the negative traits of especially envy and selfish ambition, zelos. We get our English word zeal transliterated from that word. It can be a neutral word. It can be a good term. It can be a negative term, as it is in this concept. A zeal for something you ought not to have or don't yet achieve is called envy. And then arithia, self-ambition. These twin themes are repeated at the beginning, at the end of the earthly human section, or the earthly wisdom section in verse 14 and 16. Those two vices, like the rest that will be listed, are shown in their roots as well as in their fruits. And they don't proceed from above. A cluster of 4 epithets or adjectives are marked by alliteration in the second major section of this. 4 of them begin with the Greek letter epsilon, or E in English. And then there are 2 that switches to the alpha or the A. And even with those last 2, as you finish this passage, the final part of the word kritos is used, giving a sound alliteration and an assonation to the whole passage. He's being very intentional in structuring it for creativity and for communication, to be remembered and to be meditated on as a result. It's great Greek, and it's even greater truth. But let's take a look at this passage. What is otherwise as opposed to wise? He begins in verse 13 when he says, "Who among you is wise and understanding?" He's asking the question, if you think you're wise and you have understanding, the term wisdom means skilled or skillful and experienced. And the second is having knowledge in a way that makes one effectual in the exercise of that knowledge. An expert, a learned person, a person of letters, a person of understanding. He said, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" And then he goes right to the heart of it. Let him show by his good behavior. Wisdom will result in a way of life. Wisdom will show up. If it's rooted well, it'll show up in fruit well. And he says, let him show by his good behavior the deeds done in the gentleness of wisdom. That word gentleness is a word that the lexicon would give you a definition that says it's the quality of not being overly impressed by a sense of one's self-importance. Synonyms would be gentle and humble and courteous and consideration and meekness. All of the civility we've lost in our modern culture. If you are wise and you have understanding, it will show up in a gentle, a quiet, a controlled demeanor of lifestyle. Earlier, James had demanded that if you say you have faith, show me your works. Here he says, if you have wisdom, show me your works. Because whether it's faith or whether it's wisdom, it will be demonstrated by good conduct, fine conduct. But now comes the contrast, and now he begins on a list of what wisdom is not, the otherwise. If you have a bitter jealousy, and the second one is selfish ambition in your heart. Do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. Notice how he strings these together. A bitter jealousy is an intense bitterness born out of envy. And selfish ambition is self-seeking and self-serving. Are you in this for them? Are you in this for you? I talked to a president at another school, and he talked about a faculty member who had been at their school, left, and then came back. And he said there was growth in him, in this particular faculty member, because when he was here before, he was all about his own stuff. He was here to promote his own material. He was here to promote his own reputation. He was here to be looked on with great favor in the academic community. And then God did a work in his heart, and when he came back, he was here for us. He was here for our students. He was here for our community. That's a lesson for those of us who have the responsibility of teaching and communicating with you as students. That's good for all of us. If you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, don't be arrogant and so lie against the truth. What's the lie against the truth in the passage? Is that wisdom is accompanied by meekness, because some people think the smarter you get, the more arrogant it's okay. Because knowledge by itself, Paul says, puffs up. Some think that's okay. That's lying against truth. Because God's word would say, if you're wise, you will be meek. If you're wise, you won't be selfish. If you're wise, there won't be bitter envying toward other colleagues or toward other ministries. By the way, both of these are spiritual subsurface icebergs that can sink your boat in the ministry. Why is that church growing faster than mine? I'm preaching the word. They're doing gimmickry. What's the deal? It'll eat your lunch. In fact, Paul says in his epistle to the Corinthians, if we compare ourselves with ourselves, we are you ready for this? Unwise. Unwise. Verse 15, this wisdom is not that which comes down from above. Kent Hughes, in his commentary, says it's the diabolical bloodline of pseudo-wisdom. James is concerned to demonstrate that wisdom exhibited by those referenced in the preceding verse have nothing to do with God and his emanating wisdom that is ours for the asking. James uses three adjectives now arranged in an ascending order of strength, but a descending order of the depths of danger to show the root of all human wisdom. If that's the fruit of it, what's the root of it? He goes on to say, but this kind is not from heaven, it's earthly in its origin. Its world is the source. The world is the source and its boundary. It's earth as opposed to heavenly. Literally, epigeios. It's earth fixed. It rests only on earth. It's earthly. Second, it's natural as opposed to spiritual, psyche in Greek, as opposed to pneumatica. It is natural. It's soulish only without any spiritual content. This word is contrasted to spirituality in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. It pertains to life in the natural world and whatever belongs to it, in contrast to the realm of experience where the central characteristic is the presence of the work and the power of the Spirit. The natural man, that's the word for it, the psychikos man, cannot understand the things of the Spirit of God because those things are spiritually understood. Devoid of the Spirit means there's a limitation against understanding spiritual things. This is wisdom from the earth. It's natural. It's in its root origin is demonic. It's actually demonic. This isn't popular in academia. This isn't popular in our culture, where knowledge tends to become power. It's demonic. It's radically evil in its source, originating from the lower spirit world, not, he says, from above. I fear we don't think about this enough. In education, in family discipleship, in church ministry, in cultural engagement, we tend to want to argue and wrestle with the natural and forgetting that it has demonic influence pervading it. If you don't think that's right, back in this chapter in verse 6, look at it. The tongue is a fire. The very world of iniquity, the tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the entire course of our life, and it is set on fire from hell. Twice James says, you want to know where the root of all of this dissension is? You want to know the root of contradictory teaching that's opposed to heavenly wisdom? It all originates and rooted in hell. It's demonic in source. So the question is, are you learning the truth of life, or are you concentrating on the truth of death? And to whom are you going to give your kids for their instruction? Ministers of life or ministers of death? What music do you listen to? Music of life or music of death? What books do you read? Books of life or books of death? What fascinates you the most in movies or DVDs? The life from below or the life from above? It's a wisdom question. And because it's a wisdom question, it's a wisdom choice. A couple of commentaries that I looked at reference this very thought back to 1 Thessalonians 5:23 when it says, now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The parallel in the spirit and demonic, the parallel of the soul and that which is sensual with the body part only, the soulish aspect is the sensual aspect, that which is just purely natural. And the body is how we have contact with that which is earthly. Paul would say all three need sanctification. And when you got saved, it wasn't just your spirit. Your spirit still needs to be saved. Paul says, cleanse yourself from every defilement of spirit. Because you're a Christian, you can't divide the person between the bipart or the tripart of humanity and say one half is saved, the other half isn't yet. All of it, God has determined will be saved, and all of them still need to be sanctified on an ongoing basis, whether it's your spirit, your soul, or your body, and mine as well. See, the wisdom that is not from above has this threefold description: earthly, sensual, demonic. Those are its roots, those are its attributes, and the fruit. What does it do? He says the result of that is that there's disorder and every evil thing. I just need to tell you, in case you haven't noticed, the world's not getting better and won't be. With all of our knowledge and with all of our invention, absent from the morality, it's only going to let us get in more and more trouble and fight more and more about advantage, struggle more and more about power, possess more and more with regard to things. I love Kent Hughes' illustration of this final point when he says one of the words that came out of World War II was the word snafu. Snafu stands for, it's an acronym standing for situation normal, all fouled up. That's where that word originated, was out of World War II. According to the Chicago Tribune, the Pentagon has now scrapped that word for a new one, and it's called FUB, F-U-B-B, fouled up beyond belief. FUB. Sadly, both words described any church, any school, any life where false wisdom of the world prevails. It's all fouled up. Unfortunately, beyond belief. It's otherwise, as opposed to wise. Well, then James says, let me set down the fruits of wisdom. What is the description of what is wise? Number one, it's pure. He says, but the wisdom from above, notice the contrast, but the wisdom from above versus that which is not from above is first and foremost pure. Ironically, that's the same word that's used of Jesus. In 1 John 3, beloved, now are we the children of God, and it does not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he appears, we'll be like him, for we'll see him as he is. He who has this hope in himself purifies himself, even as he is pure. Same word. Undefiled. It's the opposite of double-mindedness in chapter 1 and in chapter 4, and hence it relates to the idea of moral as well as devotional purity before God. James Adamson says this: purity is the key to all of the other qualities of wisdom to follow. It's the umbrella. Wisdom that comes from God is pure. That's first and foremost. Everything else comes under that overarching attribute, as another writer said. The purity thus ought to be the lead purpose in a life of wisdom. Why are you and I coming to seminary? Paul says the goal of our instruction is love from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. If purity of life is not your ultimate goal, then you're not going to be using God's truth and God's wisdom for its design. Because godly wisdom should make you more wise like God. So it is a theocentric pursuit, not a knowledge pursuit. Is there knowledge? Absolutely. There's words, there's text, there's creative writing, there's literary form, there's theological statement, unbelievable content, but never devoid from the pursuit of character. And so it ought to be the lead purpose for you who are students and prospective students and faculty. Am I living a life of purity, which has been the goal of wisdom all along? Not to live a life of purity, obviously, is otherwise not wise. It carries with it the Hebraic idea of shalom, because he goes on to say this, it's pure and therefore it's peaceable. And the reason it's peaceable is because it's gentle. Peaceable because people who have truly met Christ through the Prince of Peace then have the opportunity to demonstrate that peace toward others. And that brings a gentleness, not insisting on every personal right, yielding and gentle and kind and courteous and tolerant. So these peaceable and gentle are these words that begin with that the Greek letter E all the way through here. And as Hort writes, to be gentle is to be unwilling to exact strict claims. A wise person assumes a non-combative stance and avoids getting angry, especially when provoked. The words mean deferring to others when there's no serious moral or theological issue at stake. He's already said in here, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. There is a righteous anger, but that's not our biggest problem. My biggest problem is not usually righteous anger. It's when my anger is unrighteous, self-seeking, self-preserving, self-controlling. The word means deferring to others. As long as there's no moral or theological issue at stake that can be demonstrated from Scripture, be gentle. Be gentle. That leads to reasonable. There's no good word in English to represent the Greek word. It has an idea that it means to be submissive and compliant and obedient. It's unique to James. It's unique to James in the whole of the Scripture here. It seems to express a person who's been wronged and therefore could claim their rights, but foregoing them because he chooses to make allowances for the weakness or the ignorance of others when he would do more harm than good in correcting them or fighting for his own way. Being reasonable, full of mercy and good fruit. Not just having mercy, but being full of mercy. That's what merciful means. Catch that? Merciful, full of mercy and good fruits. Not just the emotion, but it's compassion in action. Because when you have mercy, it's not just what you feel, but if you have that feeling, you can't help but acting it out. Full of mercy and good fruits. Unwavering. Not being judgmental or divisive, but steadily impartial in your treatment of people. That was one of the tests of faith back earlier in the book. If a guy's got a gold ring on, wearing great clothes, do you treat him differently than one who doesn't? Preferential treatment is ungodly because God is no respecter of person. You may choose to relate to somebody differently. One is your first thought's not to give them another ring, as opposed to meeting the need of somebody who doesn't have. So the treatment is not identical, but if there's preference, that's usually self-motivated and ambition-motivated. There's nothing wrong with having, and the Bible says that there's also contentment in not having that God asks us. Unwavering, no partiality. That word too is only found in this passage in the New Testament. And then finally, without hypocrisy. Without hypocrisy. These are just the flip side of the wisdom that is not from above. The story is told of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, who used to tell of a telegram that he sent to 12 of his friends, all men of great virtue and considerable position in their society. The message was simply worded, "Fly at once, all is discovered." Within 24 hours, the story is told, all 12 left the city. It might have been a joke, which it was, but it suggests far too much about their lack of character. See, people full of wisdom do not act like people who are not, and people full of wisdom would not have to flee a city within a day just so they wouldn't get found out. One of my favorite quotes is Warren Wiersbe, who says this, that a person with integrity is not divided, that's duplicity, or merely pretending, that's hypocrisy. He or she is whole, life is put together, and things are working harmoniously. People with integrity have nothing to hide and nothing to fear. You don't have to fear a telegram. All is discovered. Fly at once. Wise or otherwise. Christian wisdom demands and demonstrates the purity and the sincerity of Jesus Christ, because in him are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. He finishes this passage in verse 18 with a little bit of a twisting proverb that's just designed to alert your attention, because he says, "And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown by peace by those who make peace." How do you plant fruit? You plant seeds, not fruit. How do you sow fruit? Well, what is sown, I think, in the passage, in this little sort of a tongue-twisting proverb as it comes out in English, is that it's God-given wisdom that you sow. By whom? People whose tongues are under control, people who are at peace and people who make peace. What's the result? It becomes, out of the root of God's wisdom, comes the fruit of righteousness. Ken Boe is right when he said this, that wisdom is skill in the art of living life with each component under the dominion of God. Proverbs would put it this way: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If you don't have a fear of the Lord, you can have so many degrees that you get a temperature. But if you haven't begun to fear the Lord, you haven't begun to get wise. The knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So why would I invite you to Dallas Seminary, and why do I invite you to stay at Dallas Seminary? Is that the beginning of wisdom is this: acquire wisdom, and in all you're acquiring, get understanding. Would you bow your heads with me in prayer? Father, deliver us from the temptation to get smart without wisdom, to accumulate knowledge without understanding. Protect us from having a position that runs ahead of our character, from having a voice that is not rooted in virtue. Father, each one of us will wrestle for a lifetime with paying attention to that which comes from above, or that which comes from below. The root is different, and the fruit is opposite as well. And what a difference in the characteristics in between. May this be the pursuit of our hearts. Give wisdom to those who are wondering where they should be equipped. Be with our students as they continue in this semester. Thank you for a wonderful day in which to study and then relax together. We ask for your refreshment over the weekend, and we'll give you thanks. In Jesus' name, amen.